I need some help this morning. So I will be asking people for what they think along the way. So please follow me along. I had a bit of an insight I wanted to share with you, and I'm not quite sure where that insight is taking me. So please join me for this journey. I spent a lot of time on chapter 47 in Genesis, the end of the Sedra. And I told you the story of how the Egyptians kind of sold everything. And these verses triggered a bit in me. So let me share with you what was triggered and get your responses. In verse 13 and chapter 47, the following words were spoken: V'lechem ein bekol haaretz. Now there was no bread in all the world, for the famine was very severe. For me, those words triggered thoughts of the long line of vehicles lined up around the country for basic food supplies. I don't know if you've seen it, but the lines go on for miles in some cases, and the news will show that people are opening their trunks and a box of food is put in. It seems unbelievable to me that in the United States of America, in the year 2020, almost 21, we have people, especially children, who are hungry. I think it's quite appropriate to contact our elected officials of both parties and urge them to pass a stimulus bill so that those unemployed, through no fault of their own, have a chance at maintaining their homes and having food to eat. We all know one of the basic Jewish imperatives that we learn early on is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. What would we expect from our friends and neighbors to do for us if we lacked food, warmth, and a place to live? I would hope they would help us as needed. So I do urge people to contact all our officials and say, pass something. If you're going to pass a small bill, pass it. If you're going to pass a large bill, pass it. We spoke before about the Misha Berach. It's hard to imagine a single mother with a few children in a rental apartment who's been paying the rent off of the earlier stimulus checks and there's no money coming. Where do you go? What do you do? And so when I read that verse that there's no bread in all the world and the famine was very severe, that's what triggered. Now here's another trigger. We're going to all do some commentary on the Bible today. Maybe we get your name in the next Chumash. If you follow in verse 25, I'll read it to you in English, and I just want your thoughts on this. So here's the picture. The Egyptians have given all their money for food. They've given all their animals for food, and they've leased their land for food. And then Joseph says to them, okay, here's the deal. You'll be tenant farmers on your land, and 1/5 of everything you grow goes to Pharaoh, and the other 4/5, the other 80% you keep for yourself, for food, for tools, whatever. And in verse 25, here's what the Egyptians allegedly said. And they said, you have saved our lives. We are grateful to my Lord, and we shall be serfs to Pharaoh. So what I want to ask you is, did they say that? Or if they said it, did they mean it? This may want to be maybe one of those instances where the words don't really convey what they're feeling. And so I have doubts about the authenticity of these words in terms of, is this really what they meant? And interestingly, if you're in the Chumash, and I'll read it to you, the Chumash gives us two different responses. And so here's the first response. If you have still the Chumash, I'm on page 288. Just look for number 25 where the word is grateful. And so here the Chumash says, Joseph's action, which is taking their money, taking their cattle, taking their land, must be judged in the context of the ancient Near Eastern world, by whose norms Joseph emerges here as a shrewd, successful, and highly admirable administrator. So at first glance, if we're trying to figure out if the Egyptians are really happy here, and we look at the commentary in our Chumash, it tells us what? Joseph was a smart business person, and he worked all these deals, and everything is fine. My suggestion is that's not the case. By the way, I'm going to put on my other kippah for a second as a history professor. After the Civil War, many of the slaves became tenant farmers, and they were working the lands that they had been slaves on, and they had contracts with the owners. And the contracts were that of the crop that they would produce, some of that would go back to the owner for the use of the land, etc., and some of that they would keep for themselves. Historically speaking, the life of a tenant farmer was bleak. It was dismal. Why? Because even at a great year where the crop was successful, you barely made enough money to cover your debt. So before people were planting, what did they have to do? They had to spend money for seeds, equipment, food, etc. So even if you had a great crop that year, you were able to pay off your debt, and then what? You had to borrow again for the next planting year. So being a tenant farmer is not a great existence. And there are examples of the life expectancy being in the 30s, etc. So I just want to point that out to you. I do not think, when I read this verse, that they said, the Egyptians, you have saved our lives, we are grateful to my Lord, and we shall be servants to Pharaoh. I don't think that that's really what they felt. I think indeed that it was quite the opposite, that this is a verse of sarcasm, and they're really not happy at all. In fact, if you would look at the bottom of the same page, it's interesting. Our Chumash gives us exactly opposite views of the same verse. Look at the very bottom of the page. I'll read it to you. We shall be serfs to Pharaoh. A generation later, the Egyptians would take their revenge on Joseph for having reduced them to slavery by enslaving his people. I think there's a lot going on here. Now, as I was processing this, and you'll be able to follow me here, there was a few words that jumped out at me. I hope you have, once again, same verse, verse 25, the same verse in Hebrew. At the very end of, and they said, the Egyptians, you have saved our lives, we're grateful to my Lord, we shall be servants to Pharaoh. The Hebrew says, V'hayinu avadim lefaro. V'hayinu avadim lefaro. Now, I'm sitting there thinking, now, I've heard these verses, I've heard those words before. V'hayinu avadim lefaro. Anyone, where have you heard the exact same words? In your Haggadah for Passover. And this, by the way, is the official version because it's Manischewitz. Just kidding. A little Haggadah humor there. Where have you heard those words? Hayinu avadim lefaro. Anyone? The exact words. Yes, I see some people have it. It is the answer to the 4 questions. Why is this night different from all other nights? By the way, the holidays are early this year, so Passover is coming kind of quickly. So you ask the 4 questions, and the answer to the 4 questions, why is this night different from all other nights, is what? Avadim hayinu lefaro. We were slaves to Pharaoh. But those were the same words that the Egyptians said. Hayinu avadim lefaro. Oh, I must have hit something. Okay, hold on. Okay, so, all right. I hit something. Okay, hold on. All right, can you see me, everyone? No, can you hear me? Yes, okay, hold on. Hold on. All right. I don't know how, but can you still hear me, everyone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I will get my technical advisor to come up and help me here. I don't know what has happened. I will ask my daughter Rachel if she's watching to come up. Okay, we'll let it go. So let me press on because this is the high point. There we go. I don't know why I'm gone, but I'm still here. Okay, let's press on. Okay, somebody, it says the host has stopped it. I don't know why. Not me. All right, but let me go on here. Let me. Okay. All right. So here's my point, ladies and gentlemen. For me, these words triggered something that you had the same words, v'hayinu avadim lefaro, and then we say, okay, hold on, a little technical difficulty.
There you go.
Okay, mazel tov. All right. So what I want to suggest to you is one of the things that we always read in the Torah is that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And the rabbis had difficulty with that. Why was God hardening Pharaoh's heart? Why was there so much resistance from the Pharaoh to letting the people go? And what I want to suggest to you this morning is that the resistance was a second generation of Egyptians who knew of the actions of Joseph and acted vindictively. In fact, the Torah itself hints at this when we start reading the Exodus story, which is coming up in a few weeks. And I'll just read this to you. In the very beginning of Exodus, verse 11, so they, the Egyptians, set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pithom and Ramses. Ramses was where? Ramses was where Jacob and the whole clan and all the Israelites lived, and they had bread. They had food. So imagine you're an Egyptian. This is your country, and you've given up all your money, all your livestock, all your land. But you know, in Goshen, the Israelite visitors have their land, their cattle, their possessions, and their food. So I think that it's ironic that here Ramses, where the Israelites had lived in places of plenty and leisure for a previous generation, became places of poverty and harsh labor for the next. So I'm still processing this. And if you have any ideas about it, but basically what I'm saying is that the similarity of the words, when the Torah says about the Egyptians, v'hayinu avadim leFaro, that we were slaves to Pharaoh, and then we say in the Haggadah, avadim hayinu leFaro, that's why they were mad at us. That's basically what I'm saying. And it explains some of the animosity that Moses and Aaron faced, and it takes 10 plagues to get us out of there. And then we're not even out, we're pursued by the Egyptians. So I just want to put this in context, and then I'll finish. Anybody have any discovered, or what I think is an interesting look at the Torah and the Haggadah? Any thoughts? Any responses? Okay. But think about it. Yes, please. Ross.
So, what was the world at that time? Was it the custom to make people into serfs? Because I know it was later on. You know, if you read anything about Europe in later generations, it was the kings and queens had serfs. So was this the first instance of people being, in a sense, put to work in order to work, so to speak. You have the option of dying of starvation or working for your master.
I cannot answer definitively in terms of an honest historical answer. My guess is that the way it was done, with kind of not haste, but with a matter of certainty that it had been done before. And it opens up a whole window. Don't forget, one of the early legal codes which precedes the Torah is called the Code of Hammurabi, which is a Babylonian code which had all sorts of laws and rules and regulations. It had laws about divorce and lawyers and judges. So my guess is that this process was already in existence. And so Joseph came up with this idea. It was all legal, by the way. Notice it's not done by force, that they're kind of signing papers and agreements. So my answer is probably legal in that regard. But I do think, though, that people do remember when things were done. And was it good optics, by the way, for the Israelites to be in their little fenced off area with everything, while their neighbors had nothing? I'm just saying that listen, people are talking about the vaccine, and there's already been some news reports that some executive of a hospital who's a bureaucrat is getting the vaccine, and the front line, the people who are the nurses and the doctors who are working with patients are not getting it. And those people are looking back at the bureaucrats and say, excuse me, you should be getting that vaccine till we get it first. So I think it's that notion. But thank you for that question.
Rabbi.
Yes, please.
So the one thing, when you're asking about the optics, though, the optics that God wanted to speak for people to see is that the people who believe in God have plenty, and that they're not dependent on Pharaoh or idols, but they've actually got, that God is providing for the Jewish people, and that, that he's, I think the whole purpose of the plagues was to convince the people of the world that God, is, God exists, and that God, takes care of his people.
Yes, that's why it's interesting that the commentary, I think the commentaries or the commentators were struggling with this, as I was in a way. Listen, we still have to ask ourselves, and I kind of, one of my ideals is love your neighbors yourself. And God, in a way, is a universal God. And so we don't want, in fact, what do we do with the Seder? We take we dip our finger in the wine and take some wine away because we're sad that the plagues had to be placed on the Egyptians. And even crossing of the Red Sea, there's a midrash that people started to celebrate, and Moses is saying, well, people died here, we don't want to celebrate. So it just gave me the background of this, made me think particularly the connections of the words, that avadim leparo, that they were also slaves to Pharaoh, and we talk about being slaves. So yes, but I do think that this, what I was saying is that this accounts for some of the animosity that the Egyptians had toward the Israelites, and whether that was God caused or not, I'm not sure. But when I saw the words avadim leparo, and I know that rang a bell, I wanted to articulate that. Yeah. So yes, I'm just putting it out there as an idea.
Yeah.
I have one more question, if I may.
Yes, please.
What's going on there? Okay, so I began to think of the year of the Shvita, when presumably anybody in debt is out of debt, and then I said to myself, wait, that didn't happen until after the Israelites got the Torah. But to me, it's kind of like a consequence. You did it to them, they did it to you, and now in your new land of Israel, and now that you're going to Israel and you're going to live in this society of idealism, so to speak, if you put someone in debt, they come out of it. So I just saw that kind of as a continuation, which is for another discussion.
Well, what's interesting, and back to Pip's point, it's interesting. You all know that the laws of harvesting a field. If we're harvesting a field and something drops on the ground, what are you supposed to do with it?
Keep it
You're
there.
supposed to leave it so that in the evening time, people who need the food can come and get it. And you give them a sense of dignity by not like picking it up and saying, here, you need this. I remember as a kid, we went down to the parts of southern Florida, and for whatever reason, some farm had been overplanted or something, and my parents said, okay, pick all whatever it was, tomatoes or apples or whatever, and I thought that was really something. So later on in Judaism, the rabbis would really develop this sense of, in another part of the Chumash, they talk about slaves, and Jewish law made it hard for Jewish people to have slaves. So I think later, Roz, to your point, that the rabbis would work very hard to say that if you love your neighbor as yourself, then we really have a moral responsibility. In fact, we even say a holy responsibility to take care of the other person. And there's a very pragmatic response to this as well. When bad things happen to Jews, it's not Jewish people who are doing that. It's non-Jews who have learned this hatred. So we need non-Jewish people to step in and say, okay, this is not right, because we have to treat Jewish people with total dignity and respect. So it goes both ways. And these verses gave me an additional insight into why there was so much animosity from the Pharaoh. So what I want to suggest, and we'll leave Exodus to another time, but Exodus says there was a new Pharaoh in Egypt, like we're getting a new president, but they're not pharaohs. But did the new Pharaoh know about the old Pharaoh? Of course they did. Did the new Pharaoh know about the Israelites? Of course. Did he know about Joseph? Of course. But he, for whatever reason, he chose to ignore that. So I'm just suggesting here that the people knew that this had been done by Joseph. They didn't accept it. They didn't like it. And that created later and later generations, some belligerence, etc. And I think that's fair to say historically. We're still removing Civil War monuments that are up around the Atlanta area now, belatedly, 150 years later, taking away some of those Confederate-based monuments. And this is people looking at them and saying, this is not good. So let me read my conclusion here, and then if you have any more comments, jump in. For now, I've concluded that the actions we take today are significant in ways we ourselves probably don't fully understand. When we act as a person, community, or nation, it must be based on principles that we advocate and believe. For me, one of the clearest ideals has been already articulated: love your neighbor as yourself. If we treat people with dignity, respect, and fairness, that response will be the same. Peace can come in our time when that precept is believed in and practiced. In real world terms, hunger and poverty must be addressed, injustice and prejudice confronted, and inequality acknowledged. I want to end with a little story. When I was in the Navy, we were assigned, when we're going to be in dangerous areas, we were assigned, we had enlisted people working in the chaplain's office. In the Army, they were called chaplain's assistants. In the Navy, they were called RPs, religious program specialists. And so one of the jobs of the senior enlisted person, when they went with the chaplain in an area of danger, was to guard the chaplain. They were armed, we were not. It was against regulations for chaplains to carry weapons. You could get in trouble. So when that person, whomever it was going to be looking out for me, I didn't care a bit about that person's race, religion, ethnic background, sexuality at all. I only had one concern: how well they could shoot. My life was in their hands. My attitude towards them was one of respect and gratitude. In effect, our lives are in each other's hands. what we do with that knowledge is our responsibility and our future. And with that, I'll say Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
So any final thoughts about any of that? Okay. Thank you for your comments.